Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. Our topic for this webinar is strengthening community impact with capacity building and technical assistance. We have a great dialogue and a great discussion for you all today. We are joined today by the Greenlining Institute, Transportation for America, and the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. I am Simbiat Yusuf Mahler, the events manager at Fourth. And before I pass it along to our moderator today, we have a few updates and announcements from the Fourth team. Attendees, we ask that you please submit your questions through the attendee chat. We will be having a Q&A portion of the webinar after the presentations. We will also be sharing the webinar slides as well as the presentation and the recording of this panel with you all shortly after the webinar. So if you will be dropping a few links. So if you miss any links, if you miss any of the key things that is being said on this webinar, we will make sure that you have all of that information after the webinar, including resources from our speakers today. And in case you've forgotten who we are at Fourth and what we do, we are Fourth. We are on a mission to electrify transportation. We bring people together and we create solutions that reduces pollution and barriers to access. Our work is done in 5 focus areas. We have our access to electric cars, access to charging, access to emerging mode, events and partnerships, and policy. If you have any questions, if you want to learn more about the work we do at Fourth, you can find more information on our website at fourthmobility.org. And the work we do wouldn't happen without the support of our members and our sponsors. We want to use this opportunity to thank our members and thank our sponsor for this webinar. If you have any questions, if you want to learn how to become a sponsor of a webinar or a webinar season, we are actively working on the 2024 season. You can find more information on our website or you can reach out to our event partnership and membership manager, Rachel Havenkamp. Our email is on the screen, but we will have more information in the webinar recap. Ooh, exciting. As you may have heard, we are taking the Roadmap Show on the road. It is coming to Detroit next year, and we want to hear from you. What are the transportation electrification topics that are most pressing and relevant to your organization or your company? What are the dynamic speakers who you want to present on best practices and emerging questions in the industry? Most importantly, what topics should we be expanding on? We have dropped a link to a survey. We want to hear from you. We want you to share your ideas with us as we work to create a robust program. Please fill out the survey by Friday, October 6th. The survey link will be closing then. Don't worry, we will include the link to the survey in the webinar recap as well. And you can find more information about the conference at roadmapfourth.org. Another exciting update from Fourth, we've been working hard and we've launched our EV charging infrastructure education platform. This self-guided course supports stakeholders who are designing equitable public EV infrastructure programs. This program includes content on how to strengthen community involvement, which is the conversation we're having today, and impact in program design, and also includes resources on how to access federal funding to expand charging in rural and underserved communities. Great news if you're attending the webinar today, because we are offering a $100 discount on registration fee to you all. If you're interested, you can use the QR code on the screen. We will also be sharing a link with you all to join the wait list. The next cohort will be starting October 2023. So you'll be joining our wait list, and we will also be sending an email to you all with information on the program once once you've joined the waitlist. If you have any questions about the waitlist, if you have any question about the program itself, you can find that information in the link that has been dropped in the chat. And we look forward to communicating with you all. We look forward to getting you all on the waiting list and conversing with you all. And now you've heard enough from me, and I'll pass it over to Sammy, our moderator today. Sammy?
Thank you, Cindy. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Sammy, and I work as the Policy Associate at Fourth, focusing on Towards Equitable Electric Mobility TEAM project. I will be a moderator for today, and I'm really excited to hear and discuss more what technical assistance and capacity building can and should look like to increase the reach of federally funded grants to underserved communities. I want to thank our sponsor, the City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, for supporting this webinar. Thank you so much. I will now briefly introduce our panelists for today's conversation. And for our panelists, please turn on your webcam so that our audience members can meet you as I introduce you. We have Corrigan Salerno, Policy Associate at Transportation for America. Corrigan works on analysis, technical assistance, and advocacy projects in the transportation electrification and reconnecting community space to ensure and help enable equitable implementation of federal programs. Welcome, Corrigan. Good to have you here. We also have Yesenia Perez, Climate Equity Program Manager at the Greenlining Institute. Yesenia leads the development and implementation of climate resilience and clean mobility policies to ensure that they effectively address the needs of communities of color. Welcome, Yesenia. Finally, we also have Linda Bailey, Program Manager for Technical Assistance at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. Linda leads the technical assistance team, which provides support to communities, agencies, and states to build out electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Welcome, Linda. Before we dive to today's discussion, we like to do a short icebreaker question just to get us started with the conversation. And for today, for our panelists, the icebreaker question that I have for you all is, in 2 to 3 words, what is one way that organizations and institutions can help build capacity of communities for transportation electrification? Just 2 to 3 words, and we'll start with you, Linda.
I think 2 to 3 words, I would say engagement. People need to be talking together about this. Nothing without about us without us. And there needs to be a constant dialogue with all the communities that are affected by any of the projects that might be going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you. What about you, Yesenia? What are your 2 to 3 words?
Yeah, I think the key words for greenlining here is really investing in community ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about you, Corrigan?
I think I'm going to go for 2, just communicate simply. I think that's super important to make sure that every piece of material you put out is easy to interpret to every different kind of audience.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I'll now invite our panelists to turn off their webcams, and I'll briefly introduce the topic, and you'll hear shortly from them. And once we have the presentations, we'll have time for questions and answers. So just to set us some context and do some level setting, technical assistance and capacity building are terms we hear often. But let's first specify, what do we mean by these terms? At Fourth, we understand capacity building as the process of resourcing organizations and communities so that they have the relationships, funding, knowledge, and expertise to advance their visions and to influence policy outcomes. This could include sharing best practices, identifying resources, making grants, etc. And technical assistance can take various forms. In this context, technical assistance could look like helping applicants and entities navigate the often complicated and often resource-intensive process of applying for federal grants. Technical assistance could also look like helping applicants manage a grant funding, write strong grant proposals, and provide specialized topical guidance on topics such as community needs assessment, community engagement, and so much more. Technical assistance is an important aspect of building capacity, and we can think of it as even a precursor for capacity building. At Fourth, we do technical assistance and capacity building in a few different ways. Recently, we assisted communities with direct application support and technical expertise for the charging and fueling infrastructure CFI grant applications. In Oregon, the Oregon Department of Transportation has contracted with Fourth to provide technical assistance and support applicants on their journey to installing EV charging. And this assistance could look like sharing basic information, but also like helping someone complete and submit a rebate application submission. At TEEM, we support technical assistance and capacity building by directly resourcing the work of our partners, by sharing best practices, sharing funding opportunities, and creating a network of advocates to share best practices. So I've shared with you what these terms mean, what these examples could look like, and I want to share a little bit about why does this work? Why does this work of technical assistance and capacity building? Why does this matter right now? It matters because, as many of you know, we are at such an important moment with climate investments and climate policies. We know that we have an unprecedented amount of funding available through the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as through other federal and state grant opportunities. So we know that there's this historic opportunity to really improve air quality, to secure better health outcomes, and to secure benefits for communities, particularly for communities in underserved communities. While these opportunities exist, at the same time, we know there's a history of systemic racism that shapes the very access to these federal state grant opportunities. Decades of disinvestment means that so many of our partners have limited capacity and limited resources to take advantage of these federal opportunities in the first place. And it's in this context, having robust technical assistance and capacity building is so important so that we can bridge the gap between opportunities that exist and community capacity and community expertise. So you'll hear so much more today from our speakers about what that looks like and some examples. And I wanted to share this context so that we are all on the same page about what we mean by these terms. And with that, I will now invite our first speaker, Corrigan, for your presentation. So take it away, Corrigan.
Thanks, Sammy. Yeah, so today I just wanted to talk a little bit more about that current transportation policy environment and why that technical assistance resources that we have through the IIJA and IRA are so necessary to reach those goals, and exactly just outline some of those resources available. And could I get the next slide? Great, and the next. Sorry, and the next slide. Yeah, so Transportation for America, a little bit about us. We're a project of Smart Growth America, and we envision a country where no matter where you live or who you are, you can enjoy living in a place that is healthy, prosperous, and resilient. And next slide, please. Sorry. And we do that work through our technical assistance work, such as with the Community Connectors program, which I'll get into in a little bit, our advocacy with elected officials, and our thought leadership, like our reports Divided by Design, which came out earlier this year. And next slide, please. And that work is guided by our principles, which are to prioritize maintenance first before we start expanding new facilities, designing for safety over speed, and connecting people to jobs and services in ways that center different multimodal connections. And next slide. Just a couple of quick top lines for the discussion today. I'd like to talk about kind of how we got here in this environment with foreign funding, how that kind of has turned into a conundrum for communities, the additional challenge that communities have to deal with to deploy new transportation electrification technologies, but also how technical assistance can help you get there. Next slide, please. Thanks. Yeah, so a major question we kind of have to open with is who or what are we designing infrastructure for? And unfortunately, for the past 60, 50 years, we've kind of not been designing at all for people. Of course, in the United States, we've created this inequitable infrastructure system that has prioritized moving cars more than it cares about connecting people. Next slide, please. Of course, communities have been destroyed by these skewed values, racist agendas, and official metrics that only consider drivers' times in cars, and then have now disregarded how everyone is served by the system as a whole, ignoring the value inherent to existing communities and the cost to our environment. Unfortunately, the majority of the harms of this paradigm have ended up falling on marginalized communities of color, and this harm continues every day. And of course, we can address this now, but we address this all these issues in our report, Divided by Design, which came out earlier this summer. Next slide. So as we try to move towards a system that centers people and addresses climate, electrification, and sustainability issues, we have to work in a federal system that we kind of have today. And that system was built to build up roads and existing transportation facilities, and ends up giving states a lot of flexibility and capacity to do so without as much to other priorities. But of course, with the IIJA and IRA, there are new opportunities. Next slide, please. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provides billions of dollars in funding for highways, transit, and rail. That funding is all not necessarily dedicated to solving those problems I outlined. The vast majority is actually going to existing formula funding programs, which gives state DOTs a lot of authority to spend as they wish, as long as it's within the program's guidelines and scope. Next slide, please. And the majority of that formula funding is going to two programs with really wide eligibilities, and such states have been using that to expand roads rather than maintain or address some of these other priorities. Programs like the Protect Grant, Carbon Reduction Program, which are there to address climate and resilience goals, have not been so high of a priority on this formula list and only make up a small percentage. So that's not that great. Next slide. So with those formula funds, it doesn't really matter where the national priorities are, or what could actually solve the community's problems, or what our national, what the Secretary of Transportation could wish for. But that doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, and where communities can really turn to are discretionary grants a lot of the time. Next slide. Yeah, so discretionary grants are application-based programs managed by federal agencies to address specific priorities like bridge repair, climate resilience, transit, or electrification projects. And that could be like the charging and fueling infrastructure grant that was mentioned earlier. So the problem with that, though, is that these discretionary grants end up requiring serious staff capacity to apply, and that kind of capacity is not always the same across the country. For example, the Reconnecting Communities program actually had an acceptance rate of less than 10%, which is basically on par with Ivy League school acceptance rates. So for every applicant, they had to spend significant hours poring over NOFOs and different program requirements, building time and relationship with elected officials and gaining that sort of support. All the while, there's not that much of a guarantee if you don't have the initial capacity to start building that. Next slide. So transportation electrification is a new type of paradigm, and it requires new developments and relationships between different kinds of agencies. For applicants, they have to bridge work across agencies that may have been siloed in the past, like the Department of Energy and Department of Transportation. And local communities can anticipate dealing with Department of Buildings and Department of Planning too. All the while, they also need to coordinate with utilities, CBOs, businesses, and other private stakeholders in the community, while also configuring these sites that center equity and also have to be safe and accessible in their own local context. And on top of that, they also need to comply with new programs like the NEVI standards, which itself has over 100 different requirements to account for. Next slide. So that ends up being a lot to work with. Communities might know what they want to do, but they may not know exactly how to do it. With all those pieces, they have to answer the question, how do we put it all together? Next slide. So thankfully, the IIJA and the IRA provided much needed funding towards technical assistance, which allows these communities to fill up their toolbox with a bunch of new tools. And those tools could include technical tools, such as how to understand analyses with electrification needs, political and engagement tools on how to engage with the community and build local approval. And finally, storytelling tools, which would be used to package all of the information into a compelling grant that satisfies the agency. And next slide. And there are a lot of different kinds of great resources available, and these right here are the direct TA resources. And by direct TA, I mean the capacity builder consults directly with the recipient. And just for everyone's information, there's a new opportunity coming out soon through the US DOT's Thriving Communities initiative. We'll hear a little bit more about these other direct TA from the other speakers. Next slide. And recently, we've been operating the Community Connectors Grant with help from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And this is a great opportunity to build capacity across 15 communities across the United States to help them apply for the Reconnecting Communities program and other federal grants to take down divisive infrastructure. We'll be having some news about that shortly soon this week, and we're excited to tell that story. We also have different kinds of TA that allow people to have targeted resources when they can access on their own time. So you could take a look at our Community Connectors Tools for Advocates portal. And next slide. And Transportation for America's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act portal, which outlines some of the different kinds of programs available and what you can expect from the infrastructure law as it unfolds through the next 3 years. Final slide, please. And here are some additional technical assistance targeted resources that you can all turn to. And we'll put this in the recap, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Corrigan. That was great. Thanks for setting that context, for sharing us how we got here, and also the wealth of resources around technical assistance that was on your presentation. Thank you. I'll now invite our next speaker, Yesenia, for your presentation.
Hi, everyone. I am Yesenia Perez, and I'm the Climate Equity Program Manager at the Greenlining Institute. And that was super great context. And today I'm really excited to speak with you about our work at the Greenlining providing technical assistance to one of these Justice 40 pilot programs happening now and what that actually looks like. So a little bit about the Greenlining Institute before I dive in today. Greenlining is a racial justice policy advocacy organization. And our vision is to work towards a future to pass policy solutions and implement best practices where communities of color can build wealth, live in healthy places, filled with economic opportunity, and really be ready to meet the challenges posed by climate change. And so much of our work is primarily based in California. We're housed in Oakland, but most recently, with a number of federal funding and policy opportunities, we're expanding our work nationally. And the program today, I'm really excited to introduce, is one such program that we're working on. So the Clean Cities Environmental Justice Initiative is one of 21 programs that was selected at the beginning of President Biden's first year to really pilot the Justice 40 initiative and develop best practices that will inform and guide Justice 40 implementation in other federal programs. And so in alignment with the Justice 40 initiative, a total of 40% of benefits will go directly into disadvantaged communities to support clean energy and clean transportation projects. This program is supported by the Department of Energy, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Argonne National Laboratory, as well as Greenlining, Equitable Cities, and Community Resource Exchange, which we are hired to support this initiative to provide training, technical expertise, resources, and capacity building. And so next, I want to speak to you about what this actually looks like. So what is the Clean Cities Environmental Justice Initiative? Well, I'll be calling it CG for short because it's definitely a mouthful. CG is a really exciting opportunity that's focused on improving equitable access to clean transportation options by engaging with local communities to co-develop solutions and projects. And this is the first time that we're really seeing equity requirements front and center in these types of programs. So through a community-centered and equity-focused approach, CG is really an opportunity to uplift the voices of marginalized communities and decision-making in their transportation planning. And so on the right-hand side of this slide, I've listed some example benefits of what communities will receive from this initiative and funding. But what I really want to focus on today and speak to is how this project aims to build long-term capacity in communities and the role that greenlining plays. A total of 17 cities across the United States, across urban, suburban, rural, and tribal communities, have been selected to hire and train a community engagement liaison. And the role of this community engagement liaison is to conduct outreach to really understand what the needs of the community are. So the role of the community engagement liaison is to work directly alongside with existing work and efforts happening within community-based organizations. And again, to really, one, understand the needs of the community, two, identify community-driven mobility and clean fuel projects, and three, really set underserved communities up for future implementation funding. So ultimately, the engagement that's happening now will help shape a community transportation action plan. And this community transportation action plan will help identify clean transportation and community identified projects and solutions to meet local needs. And that's informed by what folks are hearing. So this isn't one type of project that's intended to come out of this engagement. The point here is that the solutions are really meant to be informed by the community. So some ways that these projects can look like are maybe an EV, electric vehicle car share service for low-income communities, or a community resilience hub, or a clean energy project for affordable housing. But again, really the long-term goal and outcome here is to build foundational partnerships and set community up for longer-term capacity to access federal funding, not only today when there's opportunities, but longer term. And so on the left-hand side of this slide here, you'll see this nice photo. Here's some of the amazing folks actually doing this work. And this is from a workshop in Washington, D.C., taken earlier this summer. So what's Greenlining's role? How are we doing this? Greenlining's role is to, one, provide curriculum and facilitation and technical expertise for training and workshops around clean mobility and transportation. Two, we've developed best practices and case studies for community transportation and mobility needs assessment. So as part of our role, we created a resource of best practices, which will be dropped in the chat. And this is intended to serve as a reference for Clean Cities Energy for this CG project, as community engagement liaisons really conduct on the ground work and community engagement to understand the transportation needs. And in this resource, we've identified common methods of engagement, best practices, and case studies that have implemented those best practices within community to really center equity throughout the engagement and implementation process. And so the resource that's linked in the chat is very much a live working draft, but I did want to share it today, and we're hoping to publish it later this year. And lastly, we provide one-on-one technical assistance and troubleshooting for these coalition members. So before I end today, I wanted to show you a map of where this work is actually happening, because it's really expansive. So as I said, there are 17 different cities here indicated in yellow. They are urban, suburban, rural, and tribal communities across the US. And lastly, here is the full list of where this work is actually happening. And I really encourage you to take a screenshot, or please follow up with me to see how you can connect more deeply, whether you're a community member, community-based organization, or even a funder. Really encourage you to follow up with me to see how you can connect with this work that's happening on the ground right now. Again, please connect, reach out. I'm excited to have a follow-up conversation on this, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Yesenia, and thank you so much for bringing that point of like building long-term capacity. That is so important. I'll now invite our final speaker for today, Linda. Take it away.
Thanks, Sammy. I'm happy to be here from the Joint Offices of Energy and Transportation. A little different position than the other two speakers. I'm with the federal government. We coordinate between two different agencies. We were formed. We were formed in 2021 as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's a coordination between the Department of Energy, Secretary Granholm, and the Department of Transportation, Secretary Buttigieg. And the goal here was to take the two different areas of expertise that are necessary to really make transportation that works for communities match up with EV charging that works for transportation, kind of come to fruition. And the technical assistance, which I'll explain in a moment, is again a little different, I think, from what the other panelists are talking about. That technical assistance is critical to bridge that those kind of two different areas of expertise, knowledge, experience, and information necessary to succeed in this space. Our mission overall is to accelerate an electrified transportation system that's affordable, convenient, equitable, reliable, and safe. And the vision is a future where everyone can ride and drive electric. There's 4 different programs that we support with technical assistance within the Joint Office. I'm going to focus a lot on the first one, which the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, often referred to as NEVI. This is the biggest single program. That's the biggest amount of money already out there. It's a $5 billion 5-year program for the states to build the national charging network along corridors. The second program, which I'll talk about a little bit as we go through it, because that's still getting spooled up on the technical assistance side, is called Charging and Fueling Infrastructure, CFI. These will be for community grants, and that is a discretionary program that will come out later this year. The awards will be announced later this year. Then 2 more that are focused on transit and school buses, the Low and No Emissions Grant Program for Transit. It's through FTA, Federal Transit Administration, and this Clean School Bus Program administered by EPA. What do we mean by technical assistance? So I was talking a little bit about the expertise needed, both on the transportation side and the electricity, the energy side. NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and other national labs have been providing technical assistance to Clean Cities coalitions for nearly 30 years, for just over 30 years, I think now. And that's part of what we're tapping into as part of this program, as part of our technical assistance. What do we do right now for NEVI? NEVI is the biggest program you probably experienced if you've been engaged with the state DOT or other state agency that might be administering it. We're doing one-on meetings with those states to try and educate them about how to do outreach with their communities, how to document that properly, and how to make it meaningful at the end of the day. We also provide a concierge service where we will take questions from the grantees and answer them. And then the technical assistance program support team, where we basically have other resources we can bring into play with specific questions or issues that come up. And we're using a whole bunch of different ways to provide that expertise. Again, we're kind of trying to bridge 2 big areas: transportation, which has its own complications, as you hear from Smart Growth America, or Transportation for America on the equity side, with energy, and kind of bringing those together. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things here. This is what we've been hearing from states. So we've been working with 50 states plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. We have one-on-one meetings on a regular basis, and we also have their plans that are a required part of that program. The plans are a good window into at least the official situation going on in each of your states. So if you haven't taken a look at the NEVI plans, take a look at those, the year 2 updates. Some are already out and others will be out soon. We have been reviewing those also here in the Joint Office. So some of the top topics that we hear about on TA include equity and labor and workforce. And those are big focus areas for me when I think about how do we really achieve an EV program, an EV charging program that's meaningful for communities, that works with communities that are there, and that is in the end also makes sense for those communities. So we basically are doing a lot of stuff with our grantees. We're also creating a lot of resources, which we all have on our website, which anyone can access. And I'd encourage you, if you're interested in those programs, the NEVI or CFI, and you're wondering what is going on with them, or if there's some pieces of them you're wondering about, definitely look on our website. We have a lot of resources available there. I want to talk briefly about transit agencies, although I don't believe there's a lot of transit agencies that have been registered for this event. We have TA available for transit agencies that are receiving low and no emission bus grant programs. And that program is really critical, I think, to bringing more systematic approach to EV charging across the board. Looking at those big fleets and making sure that we're coming up with a clear plan for those. So that's been a really good program that's still spreading. These are the 2023 low and no, as it's called, kind of a strange name, but that's the typical abbreviation. These are the 2023 grantees. And then just talking generally, like NREL again has a really good history here on the clean vehicle technology side. So we're trying to bring that together with the intricacies of good transportation planning that's equitable, meaningful, and again, builds that community side at the end of the day. So how do we work with communities, or we will be working with community grantees, the CFI program, once those are announced. And we work right now with state agencies and anyone that they want to bring us in with. Coordinating with electric utilities. For those of you who are on the transportation side, that's a big network. The electrical system has another big network right on in the same geographic space. So that coordination is really critical. Identifying available funding and incentives. Analyzing the charging infrastructure needs depending on the type of project that's going in. As an example, when a bus system is going to switch to battery electric buses, the charging infrastructure has to be put in place all the way from the grid down to how the bus is charged at the end of the day. Conducting route analysis and planning, again, for those big fleets. Conducting training and workforce development. I don't have a lot on workforce development in this presentation, but that is a major issue for us. We need to bring our entire workforce up to this new technology and make sure we have people able to participate in that across the population as well. Opportunities for resiliency, that's when vehicles can provide charges back to the grid. And analyzing energy needs and grid impact. And finally, identifying solar and battery storage opportunities. That's another opportunity where sometimes these facilities can have multiple purposes in terms of how they're constructed by using battery storage. You can contact us through our online form. Initial responses within 48 hours, and general questions and feedback are welcome. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Linda. That was so helpful, and thank you for sharing about different grant programs, but also specific ways that Joint Office is already working and plans to work. So thank you so much to all our presenters. And we have now reached the questions answers discussion section, and I know there's a few questions coming in through the chat. Thank you for sending those. I'm now going to invite our panelists to join me on the virtual stage to start with the Q&A section. And something that I want to start with is we started the conversation with a quick icebreaker, and you all shared terms like community engagement and community ownership and clear communications as technical assistance components and elements of capacity building. And a question for each of you is, what would an example of technical assistance in relation to capacity building, when done right, like what would those outcomes look like? And maybe we'll start with you, Corrigan.
Yeah, so I think that would, of course, depend a lot about where the community is starting at. And because of that, I think you have to orient around processes that get you towards an outcome where you're allowed to step away from it at the end. So if you have a process that builds a community up to the point of education where you're able to identify those new grant opportunities, identify where their known unknowns are, and work from there, I think that would be the ideal outcome for technical assistance.
Thank you. Yeah, those are really good points. And what about you, Yesenia? Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think those are really great points. One program that's actually doing this really well that I want to highlight, and I think Corrigan dropped the link in his chat earlier during the presentation, is actually the Transformative Climate Communities program, which Greenlining helped to create and co-sponsor alongside the California Environmental Justice Alliance in 2016. And this program is really designed to do just that and funds disadvantaged communities to plan and implement their own climate solutions. And I think this program is really successful, and the technical expertise is really successful in that, is because technical assistance there can look anything like help reviewing a grant application to helping develop meaningful community benefits and projects so that folks are actually able to access the funds available to them.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of the TCC program, so thank you for bringing that up. Linda, I know there's a few questions for you, so maybe I'll start with the question on that's on the chat is, as states start to get the first slugs of NEVI funds out the door, it seems like many that we track anticipate to be able to build out their initial charging corridors. Is the Joint Office, FHWA, going to take a closer look at the NEVI plan updates moving forward given this dynamic?
I think the question is about, will we move off the corridors? So right now, the NEVI program is very focused on the alternative fuel corridors that are any charging site must be within a mile of those to be eligible right now under NEVI until states achieve full build out of that corridor as defined in the law. I think at this point, some states have already put together pretty extensive plans about community charging, and others have said kind of to be determined because they're still trying to get their first chargers in the ground. I think that we'll see, we expect, I guess, to see next year's plan update more information. And in this year, we already were looking for that to some extent. But again, depending on where states were, we just knew that we couldn't, they don't know if they'll have money left over, bottom line, at the end of the day, from this particular program to complete that. I will say some states are doing a really nice job elsewhere doing planning processes where they really are including everything. I'd say, like existing, all the different ways that they could fund it. A lot of states have some kind of state funding, or they have other grant programs that they're able to tap into. And I do think that there's some good examples on that side where there's really good strategy outlined that I think will come together nicely. And they can plug this money into that pretty easily.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that insight note for our audience. I know there's a question around capacity building in the chat, and if we could talk a little bit about capacity building in relation to workforce development. And maybe I'll pass it to maybe Yesenia or Corrigan.
Yesenia, feel free to take this one. I think this one might be closer to Greenlining.
Yeah, happy to take this one. So when we think of, I know we defined this earlier, but when we think of capacity building, we really think about strengthening local leadership and developing partnerships and skills, expertise and resources, right? So the community can really meet their own needs. And part of this process, when we're thinking about like transportation electrification programs, is really making sure that there's community ownership within these models. And that includes workforce development. So are we hiring folks from the community? Are we training folks in clean energy jobs? So that's part of the puzzle piece there. But I want to make sure I'm answering the question directly. So as far as resources, funding, and scholarship models, there's a few different case studies where there is a lot of community ownership, just like even electric vehicle programs. And so the electric vehicle programs are actually operated by the community itself. And it's like community members who own these EV programs. And so I think those are really good models for workforce development and making sure that folks are like trained, even folks, asking questions like, are folks trained in case like a EV charging station isn't working? Are there folks in the community who are able to fix that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, go
I could
ahead.
jump in and just say I know a couple things about workforce. One is that in the CFI grant program, which will be announced again later this year in terms of grantees, one of the critical elements that need to be included is workforce development. So I'm hoping that we'll see some really great models coming out of that, more geographically spread. I think there's a couple of good models that I can try and pull maybe for your follow-up email as well from the existing state plans that we've gone through.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for bringing that point of community ownership. I know there's kind of related questions because community ownership is also so related to community engagement. So maybe we can go to that question about if any of our presenters have knowledge of any best practices for community engagement and feedback solicitation for public charging corridor planning. And I'm sure you all have a lot of examples, so feel free to share those.
So I could hop in, and this is, of course, Linda's joint office does great work there too in giving that TA to states. But one great example I've seen is the way that the Oregon Department of Transportation has been addressing this. They've been able to use an interactive sort of map to help plan for these sites. They've been soliciting from communities just across the state in both targeted and general way to help choose where those sites are and where sort of the demand is within those corridors. And I'll drop a link in the chat there for that example.
We have some resources coming out on this, but I think I'd say just off the top of my head, we do have a few states, and I'll see if I can find the best practices that we've pulled out. Definitely Oregon rings a bell with me too. I think just because I just reviewed it, the Kentucky Year 2 plan has a really elaborate and really transparent also description of all the engagement that they've done, and they've done a lot of different levels of engagement too. I think looking, communities, but also elected officials in different communities. So I think that those are all really beneficial in terms of making sure that the interests of the wider community are expressed as part of the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Something that's coming up for me as I read these questions and think about some of the content of your presentation is best practices and practices that we can scale up. So maybe a question for each of you is, because today we heard about technical assistance and capacity building at different scales, right? At the community level as well as at the federal level. So a question for each of you is, what would be some of the practices that you want to see being scaled up to make technical assistance and capacity building accessible across communities? And maybe we can start with you, Yesenia, and then go to Corrigan, and then go to Linda.
Yeah, of course. So I think some of the best practices here that we're really seeing through these programs are one, making sure that these funds are really targeted to disadvantaged communities. And I think part of that is like, are we really tracking the money coming through these Justice 40 programs to make sure that they're being received by these communities? Two, encouraging community-led planning through a really place-based framing. So making sure that community is deeply involved in the engagement process and choosing their own solutions. And third, just really providing direct and tangible benefits in terms of that technical assistance.
Those are solid points. Anything you want to add to that, Corrigan?
Yeah, I think as for best practices, some of them that I've seen recently have come out of the Joint Office with simplification of NOFOs and finding ways to link those existing TA resources and ways to get the Justice 40 community spotlighted, like with the environmental justice screening tool included in the NOFOs recently. That's been great to see and helps communities identify where their funds need to actually go and where they should focus on. Another thing that I've really would identify is permanence and kind of centralization of resources. On my slides earlier, I singled out the DOT Navigator, and that's sort of a great example of making sure all of your TA resources in one great place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and I
love
guess,
those things. Yes, Linda, go ahead.
yeah, and I guess I would second the navigator. I think is really helpful. That's the funding navigator you're talking about, Corrigan. Yeah, I think for people looking for there are a lot of different funding opportunities in this space right now, and it can be hard to kind of keep track and figure out what makes sense for you as an organization or as a agency or community. So definitely, I would take a look at that, and I think that. As we continue to put more resources out there and try to make them more accessible to everyone, I think that's going to be helpful as everybody comes up to speed on the information in the space.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that responses for all of you. And I know we have like about 5 or 6 minutes, so maybe we can. One question that kind of want to bring this conversation back a little bit is the idea of long-term capacity building, and you all touched upon it a little bit in your presentations. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about what would that ecosystem of technical assistance and capacity building look like when we are shifting away from time-bound opportunities. So instead of specific grants or specific funding cycle, that's more one time. So what would we be needing to do to invest in that long-term capacity building? Or how in your works you've thought about that?
I think one thing that we're working on at the Joint Office is thinking about how we can do more education across the fields of planning and engineering, which are two of the key fields involved in the grant programs that we work on, and trying to make sure that some of that planning is available, whether it's via associations providing the training or elsewhere, just to kind of broaden the knowledge base and improve that across the area. And even though I don't know, maybe half, I guess, of planners and engineers are working in the public sector, probably less. There's a lot in the private sector, a lot in the nonprofit sector. And so just trying to figure out if we can kind of broaden that more to improve the expertise and the knowledge base on all the kind of players in these discussions around community building.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that one thing that's pretty important is the recent push towards more cohorts of learning and kind of the year-round capacity building efforts. Like you see that with the Reconnecting Communities Institute, Thriving Communities program, and we're also trying to do a similar thing with the Community Connectors program at SGA, where we're taking our 15 different communities and helping them sort of learn to solve the problems together, where they can always draw from each other as a collective resource.
Yeah, and I guess two things coming up on my end are so for TCC, the Transformative Climate Communities, that's a really great model for funding that can be really used for a variety of issues. So thinking about funding opportunities as really intersectional and tailored to communities, and thinking about how investments can connect needs between issues area like transportation, energy, housing, and jobs. And so not thinking about funding in just like a siloed solution because they're not siloed issues, right? And the second thing coming up for me is really our work in CG, the Clean Cities Energy Environmental Justice Initiative that I spoke to earlier, and thinking about these community engagement liaisons that are really starting the community engagement but thinking about this as a longer term, and even, once those community engagement liaisons maybe move on into a different role, how is that institutional knowledge and those relationships that are being built right now with the community, like how will those be held, and made sure that those relationships continue? And I think that's really where the capacity building and sharing lessons and ownership with community comes in, to ensure that once the community engagement liaisons, maybe there isn't funding for this project specifically anymore after the next 3 years, but how is that knowledge being held and grown within the community is really important as well.
Yeah, I want to echo that point of like really long-term relationship building. And Linda, what about on your work? Like, how are you all thinking about that long-term capacity building?
I think the biggest space on this is bringing the states up to speed with their planning efforts. We've spent a lot of energy working with the states on their NEVI plans, year 1 and now year 2. And even though that's only at the state level, it's also bringing all the states to a similar level, where I think before that there were some that were way out in front and others that were pretty far behind on the space. So I think that was pretty critical work.
Wonderful. Thank you. And as we wrap up today, I want to close us out with a question that's kind of like a takeaway lesson learned that you want to share with our audience. I know we have folks that work in the government side, nonprofit. So if you could share one key takeaway or lesson learned from your work in this field, what would that be?
I can jump in. I think a big thing I've been thinking about is this is a really dynamic space with a lot of change going on. And I think it's a huge potential because of that. Also, for some of the other things that, in transportation, we know would help to build community and create more equitable spaces for everyone. And I think we really want to maximize that impact of all these programs as part of it versus just having it as a side note. So that's really critical for us.
Yeah, I can hop in next and really build off of your point there, Linda. I think that there are so many exciting opportunities right now happening, right? That's why we're all here. But just because there's these exciting opportunities, we need to be really intentional with the way that we're moving forward to make sure that we're not replicating past injustices and like going about ways the same way things have always been done. And so I'll come back to what I've been saying again and again. Community ownership and deep community engagement is just so critical to this work.
Yeah, and I think I'm just going to continue to build off that theme. Making sure that those past harms are not recreated in current policy should be the number one goal, especially with transportation, since it's had such a permeating impact. And I think, of course, takeaway for that, curate to the broadest audience possible with your resources. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for really engaging with us, sharing your presentations and answering some of the questions. We really appreciate your time. And also thank you to our audience members for staying engaged with us. And I'll pass it to Cynthia to close us out.
Thank you. Thank you, Corrigan. Thank you, Sammy. Thank you, Linda. And thank you, Yesenia, for joining us today. We didn't get through all of the questions, but you can find our panelists' contact information on the slide deck. So we will be sending again a recap email that we include. We added a lot of links to the chat. So don't worry, don't try to grab all of them at the same time. We will be sharing the links with you all. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar, and we will be sharing the slides as well. Again, I just can't thank you all enough for joining us. I want to thank our sponsor for this webinar, City of Portland, the Borough of Planning and Sustainability. And again, Thank you to our speakers for sharing your knowledge and taking your time with us today. If you are still here, I hope you can RSVP and save for our next webinar, designing accessible EV charging systems. We've talked about how can we be equitable, but also in this system that we're creating, in the system that we're updating of infrastructure, how do we make sure that the infrastructure is also inclusive to all? So we hope you can join us on Tuesday, October 10th. Our speakers are going to explore designing equitable and inclusive EV charging system. Thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.